So welcome everyone. This meeting is now being recorded. This is actually our last presentation in our fall 2020 series. We've had actually 6 talks, will be 6 talks of the series. It's carried forward from our March 2020 symposium that we had to cancel, unfortunately, due to COVID. But we're happy to be able to bring it forward to this fall and being able to share it with you as live speaker series, as well as making YouTube videos out of all the talks. So if you missed any of the previous talks, please join our YouTube channel, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit and listen to all the talks that you may happen to have missed. And we have other videos on there as well about, for example, how to create a garden. So check out our YouTube video and subscribe to us today to view all the amazing talks that are on there. I also want to do a big thank you to all of our sponsors. These sponsors generously allowed us to carry over our funding from the March 2020 symposium through to the fall. So a big thank you to all of them. If you have the opportunity to patronize them or at least give them sort of a shout out, please do so, because again, we couldn't run a lot of our events without our sponsors. I do want to start off our event with a land acknowledgement statement. The Guelph is actually on the traditional territory of the Attawandaron and Neutral people. We honor the original ancestors of this land and also offer respect to our Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Mississauga, and Métis neighbors. We strive to be accountable by acknowledging this history and cultivating respect in our relationships with our Indigenous neighbors and the land. And as many of us are not in the city of Guelph currently, please consider the region that you are currently living in and your current relationship to the land and the people, both now and historically. And I want to introduce our speaker now. Dr. Shannon Seahra studied biodiversity and ecosystem functions, plant and insect communities, and grassland restoration for her doctoral research. She's now a terrestrial ecologist at ERM and sits on the board of directors for Pollination Guelph. If you want to reach out to her on Instagram, her Instagram handle is @biodiversity.shan. So she shares all sorts of cool posts. So if you're on Instagram, please follow her. And just got a quick housekeeping items before we turn it over to Shannon. Please remain muted and leave your video off. We do actually have you muted, but make sure your video does stay off for the entirety of the presentation. It leaves it cleaner for both a bandwidth for people as well as for a recording at the end when people view it on YouTube. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation, please add them to the chat box. At the very end of the presentation, we'll have time for a bit of a Q&A, and we'll pose them back to Shannon as we get to that point. And again, a reminder that if you missed any of the previous talks in our speaker series, please check out our YouTube channel. We're going to have the links on that same registration page you encountered before, the upcoming events, or again, you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/Pollination Guelph. So Shannon, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to share your screen with us. We'll get started with your presentation.
All right.
We're all set.
All right. Thank you, Victoria. How does that look?
Looks good.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And thank you, Victoria, for inviting me to talk about the pollinator surveys that I've done for Pollination Guelph. I've been working with Pollination Guelph since 2016. And when I initially started, I was mainly working on helping to establish the gardens at Hospice Wellington. So if you don't already know about Hospice Wellington, it's a facility that provides and promotes hospice palliative care for individuals and their families. It was established in 1980 to provide compassionate care, emotional support, and practical assistance to the community. And it's located at Scottsdale and Courtright in Guelph. So why a pollinator garden? Well, pollinator gardens give us the opportunity to foster and appreciate the diversity of life around us. And we know that nature can improve our emotional, mental, and physical well-being. Pollinators provide an essential service to natural and agricultural ecosystems, but they've been experiencing a major decline in population distribution. And factors in this decline are habitat loss and degradation, diseases, pesticides, and climate change. So species distributions may change to follow suitable climate as it shifts throughout the landscape. Bloom time may be earlier or later than pollinator species emergences, and this can also be affected by extreme weather events. and plant diversity and quality may change. So why a pollinator garden in the city? Well, a pollinator garden in an urban area can help expand pollinator habitat within the city and create habitat connectivity, which is very important for pollinators to have climate resilience. And planting trees and other vegetation can provide carbon sequestration and reduce the urban heat island effect, which occurs when a city experiences much warmer temperatures than nearby non-urban areas from the change in land use and surfaces. So urban areas and cities tend to have many non-reflective surfaces, waterproof and impervious surfaces, and these surfaces have greater heat absorption and retention. Cities also tend to have less vegetation, which also means less evaporation by plants, which helps to cool the air. So beginning in 2012, volunteers for Pollination Guelph gradually replaced almost 800 square meters of turf grass with mostly native flowering shrubs, grasses, and perennials at Hospice Wellington. And these native plants offer food for adults and larvae of pollinators, as well as places to shelter from predators, to nest, and to overwinter. Between 2012 and 2015, this work was funded by grants from several mostly local foundations, including the Grand River Conservation Foundation, the Guelph Community Foundation, the TD Friends of the Environment Foundation, and the Healing Cycle. And we are very grateful for their support. So here are some before photos of what Hospice Wellington looked like before Pollination Guelph started working on the property there. So as you can see, it's mostly turf. There's a couple shrubs and some evergreens and a couple trees. So in 2016, the gardens were renamed the Gosling Pollinator Gardens in recognition of a significant donation from the Gosling Foundation. This donation funded a doubling in the size of the gardens. It enabled Pollination Guelph to remove the sod and plant a variety of mostly native shrubs and flowering perennials. And in addition to further development and maintenance of the gardens for 10 years, the donation from the Gosling Foundation will also help to support public education activities like tours of the gardens, workshops, and the production of educational materials. So here's a really good before and after of the same angle of the property. So again, you can see before there was a lot of turf, some evergreens and some shrubs, and it's been almost entirely replaced with native pollinator-friendly plants and grasses and shrubs and some trees as well. So here's another before and after where we can see a lot of that turf has now been replaced with pollinator-friendly plants. So the Gosling Pollinator Gardens were created to provide habitat for pollinators, and species selection considerations were guided by the recognition that native pollinators have evolved to the plants that grow naturally in this area, i.e. to native plants. So native plants in particular have adapted to the local climatic conditions and the soil and rainfall that we experience. Pollination Guelph also considered incorporating larval host plants, such as milkweed for monarch butterflies and pearly everlasting for American ladies. Other species selection considerations were to provide structural diversity. So some pollinators show preferences for certain shapes of flowers because they can more easily access their nectar and pollen depending on their anatomy. Short-tongued bees, for example, prefer more open blooms, while long-tongued bees, hummingbirds, and some moths can probe for nectar deep inside tubular-shaped flowers. Some butterflies like a surface to sit on or perch on while they feed and are often attracted to flat-topped flowers, such as butterfly milkweed or stiff goldenrod. And Pollination Guelph also considered bloom time diversity. So the life cycles of pollinating insects vary. Some are active throughout the growing season. Others are actively feeding only certain times of the year. So a good pollinator garden needs to have some plants in bloom throughout the growing season, from early spring right till late fall. Planting considerations were to plant larger patches because research has shown that pollinators prefer to visit larger patches of their floral resource rather than scattered individuals or smaller patches. Insects are more likely to find and stay longer in those larger patches because it reduces the distance that a pollinating insect needs to travel to gather nectar and pollen and help maintain efficiency and conserve energy. So in the Gosling Pollinator Gardens, Pollination Guelph aims to create patches of at least 1 meter square in area by planting in groups of 3 or more. And planting in clusters like this obviously looks better too. So for garden considerations, Pollination Guelph included a water feature or a bird bath to provide water for pollinators. Pollination Guelph also leaves patches of bare ground for ground nesting bees. They mulch around newly planted plants to help them get established, but they do not top up the mulch throughout the seasons or throughout the years. We also leave fallen leaves, piles of brush and stems for sheltering, nesting and overwintering sites. And of course, we do not apply any pesticides or herbicides. So what is the purpose of doing pollinator diversity surveys and potentially other surveys at other Pollination Guelph gardens and habitats? Well, we'd like to assess pollinator diversity and habitat quality and which plant species attract the most pollinators. And this information can help us to quantify the value of pollinator habitat created by Pollination Guelph, as well as to monitor changes in population distributions over time and changes in habitat quality over time. And this data may also help assist in plant species selection in future Pollination Guelph habitat development. And more broadly, this data may be used in larger scale community science projects with other organizations. So a small note on community science. It was originally called citizen science to distinguish between amateur data collectors and professional scientists, not necessarily to describe the citizenship status of these volunteer observers. However, the term can be limiting in some contexts. So community science is a more inclusive term. It recognizes the value in amateur contributions regardless of the origin of the contributor or the status of the contributor. And bioblitzes and diversity surveys can and should be communal experiences that bring us together. So the term community science better reflects these social realities. Okay, so how did we perform these surveys? And to start off with how, I should actually say when did we perform these surveys? The first one was conducted in July 2019. And then the second one was in June of this year, 2020, and the third was in July 2020. And we conducted them between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. The garden at Hospice Wellington was roughly divided into equivalent sections, and each section was surveyed for the same time interval, so 10 minutes per section. If there are areas that had nothing in bloom at the time, we did not bother surveying them because there was no point in wasting 10 minutes there. Okay, so who conducted these surveys? Well, I've already been introduced, but my friend and colleague Bridgette was a tremendous help in these surveys. So Bridgette completed her BSc honors in entomology at Rhodes University in South Africa. After moving to Canada, she worked for a black soldier fly rearing company in Cambridge, Ontario, and she developed a breeding program and managed the pilot plant there. In her free time, she did a season-long pollinator survey for the Cambridge Pollinator Preserve and helped us at Hospice Wellington with our surveys. In the fall, she moved to Winnipeg and has started her master's program in entomology at the University of Manitoba. Okay, so how did we record the pollinators we were observing? We only recorded pollinators that were actively pollinating. So that is sitting on a flower and feeding. Sitting on a vegetative part of the plant, like the leaf or the stem, did not qualify. We would identify to family to the best of our ability. And when we were unable to identify to family, we would record the morpho family. So that's the description of the individual. We would take a photo and record the photo number. And then we would then either use iNaturalist in situ or back at our desk to identify the family. iNaturalist has been incredibly helpful for this project. Sometimes we would use field guides as well, but it can be tricky to use those in the field with flying insects that don't want to stay still. So if you haven't used iNaturalist yet, it's very easy to use. You can use it on a mobile device or a desktop. And this is a quick video just showing you how to use it.
Okay, so you've installed the iNaturalist app and created an account. Time to get outside and record your first observation. Here's how to do it. Any living thing, like a plant, animal, or fungus, can be an observation on iNaturalist. Once you find something you'd like to record, just tap Observe and take a photo. You can review your picture, then hit Next if it looks good. To identify it, hit What did you see? If you have an internet connection, iNaturalist will suggest 10 visually similar species and often a common ancestor. You can choose one of those or search for a species name. On this observation detail screen, you can add more photos of the same organism or write a note. The date, time, and location have been automatically added. You can also change the geoprivacy of the observation, mark whether it's captive or cultivated, or add it to a project. Once you're finished, just hit Share, and your observation will be uploaded for everyone to see and identify. That's it. Keep on exploring and sharing.
Okay, so I should also add that you can upload photos to the app after taking them. It doesn't have to be right then during the survey or during your hike or your gardening moment. And like I mentioned, there's a desktop version as well, which I like using for batch uploads. So if I have tons of photos to upload, I find it easier to do on the desktop. So the major orders of pollinators that we see in this region are Coleoptera, for one. So that's beetles, and they are the largest insect order, numbering thousands of species in Canada alone. The majority of beetles are not actually floral visitors, but for those that are floral visitors, some of them are really good pollinators. Especially the ones with hairy bodies, they tend to be more effective than the smooth-bodied Coleoptera because they can carry, the pollen gets stuck to their hair and they can carry the pollen around better. Pictured is a beetle from the Cantharidae family or the soldier beetle family. The next order that we often see are Diptera, or flies. So they have one pair of wings, a soft body, and short bristly antenna, and no stinger. The most common pollinating flies are hoverflies, family Syrphidae, and bee flies, family Bombylidae. Many have evolved appearances similar to bees or wasps, and this is to trick predators into thinking that they can sting them. The next major order of pollinators are Hymenoptera. So these are the bees, the wasps, ants, and sawflies. Hymenoptera have two pairs of wings, and the bees are part of this order, and they're the most important pollinators. They're usually pretty fuzzy, which helps to transfer pollen. And they're usually pretty focused on one flower species at a time, which helps to cross-pollinate plants. There's also a lot of plants that have specifically evolved adaptations to best be pollinated by certain bees. And the last order of pollinators is the Lepidoptera. So this is the second largest order of insects in the world. These are the moths and butterflies. Moths are far more diverse than butterflies. And this order is among the easiest insects to notice and identify due to their large and often colorful and patterned wings. Lepidoptera larvae will often have specific associations to specific host plants, such as milkweed and monarchs. And some moths, such as the Sphingidae family or hawk moth, shown top right, are very effective pollinators of deep-throated flowers that require smaller insects to crawl inside to reach nectar. So across the 2 years of data, the 3 surveys that we did, we observed a total of 753 individuals over 18 insect families on 42 plant species. In total, there were 3 Coleoptera individuals, 35 Diptera individuals, 702 Hymenopteran individuals, and 13 Lepidoptera. So obviously, the Hymenoptera was most numerous. So across families, we only saw a few Coleoptera, and they were from the Cantharidae family or the soldier beetle family. We saw a small number of Diptera across the 2 families, across 2 families, mostly Syrphidae flies or hoverflies, and some Conopidaes, which are thick-headed flies. The Hymenoptera order, as expected, was not only the most numerous, but the most diverse in number of families. And the Lepidoptera order was the second most diverse in number of families. So looking more closely at the families in the Hymenoptera order, Apedera was by far the most numerous, with a total of 389 individuals across the 2 years of our study. So Apedera are the cuckoo, the carpenter, the digger, the bumble, and honeybees. Halictidae was the second most numerous. These are the sweat, furrow, gnomine, and short-faced bees. We observed 148 Halictidae individuals across the 2 years of the study. You'll note that there are 2 groups of unknowns. So these are Hymenoptera that were too small and too fast for us to properly identify without lethal sampling methods. So we grouped them based on morphological characteristics. So I think it's safe to say that Hospice Wellington is doing a great job at attracting a lot of bees, which are the most effective pollinators. I also looked at which plant species at Hospice were attracting the greatest diversity of pollinators. Now, there are a few caveats to this, such as considering the timing of the survey, the bloom periods, seasonality, growing season, climate, and weather. But overall, the average of the number of families observed on a given plant species was 3.7, and the maximum number was 9 families. So I narrowed this list down to the plant species that attracted 7 or more different pollinating families across our surveys. And here they are. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to read through all the different growing requirements for them, but the purple cone flower attracted 9 pollinator families. Wild quinine attracted 8 pollinator families. Mountain mint attracted 8 pollinator families. And Culver's root also attracted 8 pollinator families. Feel free to take a screenshot if you want to plant these in your own garden. Okay, and then the next set, Pearly Everlasting, attracted 7 pollinator families. Gray dogwood attracted 7 pollinator families as well. Woodland sage, which is not native, attracted 7 pollinator families, and white meadowsweet also attracted 7 pollinator families. So these species that have high pollinator diversity, I think will help Pollination Guelph determine what species they'd like to plant in future habitat, and certainly is going to help me with my garden plans for the next year or two. Okay, so future activities. After doing all these surveys, what's next? More surveys. So Pollination Guelph is looking for volunteer entomologists, amateur or professional, that can identify insects in the field during our formal surveys. We also plan to do community science bioblitzes, which are events where the public is invited to come informally survey Pollination Guelph habitat using Inaturalist. And we had planned on doing this year, but due to the pandemic, we were unable to safely hold public events. We also would like to do surrogate baseline surveys at a site similar to Hospice prior to the gardens. So we can use the surrogate baseline survey to compare the current diversity to make our data comparisons more convincing. And there's the iNaturalist Pollination Guelph project. So this project can, for example, help track changes in species distributions in response to climate change. You don't have to be an expert to help us survey, as you saw in the video. You just take a photo when you visit one of the Pollination Guelph sites, or even when you observe pollinators in the city, and submit it to iNaturalist with your location info. So I hope this talk was informative, and thank you for joining us. Big thanks to Bridgette White and the Pollination Guelph Board, especially Claire Irwin, Lauren Widmer, Victoria McPhail. And I'm going to pass this back to Victoria, and then we'll have time for questions.
Great, thanks, Shannon. People can put their comments in the chat box. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to share my screen. Things are always changing on Zoom. I find that things don't always, they're full screen. Just bear with me just one moment, sorry. It's just a quick reminder for people to thank our sponsors and think about our sponsors going forwards, not just today, but next spring, for instance, if you're thinking about doing any work in your gardens, there's some different organizations that have sponsored us in the past. So yes, please add your questions to the chat box, and then we'll read those to Shannon. So once I get this working, apologies, sometimes Zoom doesn't work with me. And Corinne, I might need you again because for some reason my chat box doesn't want to show up when I'm in screen share mode.
Yep, I can do that. Karen, actually, I just see one question so far. Karen asked the question for those of you who aren't seeing it. Did you use visuals for surveys, or did you use traps? And Shannon actually answered it, and only visuals. Do you know, and then here's another question from Karen, do you know what plant attracts the most bees? And that's
I have the data right in front of me. I would have to do some compiling to figure that out, but I can get back to you.
All right. Here's a question from Crystal. Did you come across any invasive species?
There are quite a few Japanese beetles in the garden. Yeah, that would pretty much be it for invasive species. There's non-native species in the garden, such as cabbage white butterflies and lots of honeybees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask a question since we're still waiting. Of the bees, you did mention, as you just now, honeybees. Did you find that they were sort of more prevalent than the other species of that group?
They were one of the major
Mhm.
bees that were there, but they weren't necessarily more prevalent than bumblebees.
Ah, okay.
We do get a lot of bumblebees at hospice.
Mhm. So here's a question from John, and it is, what triggers bees to become so unfocused on one kind of flower when there are many different ones available? Some days they will all be on hardy geraniums, ignoring everything else.
That's a great question. I'm going to let Victoria answer that one.
Oops, sorry. I
If she
keep
can.
moving my screen. Well, I got my chat box back. I lost my screen, but I got chat box. Sorry, I'm going to turn my video on if it will let me do that. Yeah, a lot of it's just for ease of, collection, that there's, for some reason, that plant is producing more pollen or nectar that day. Perhaps it's due to weather, perhaps it's just due to timing of phenology. And so it's good resources that day. And it's more efficient for the pollinators to basically forage on the same thing for at least one foraging trip. That's the benefit of the species, that it learns how to work with flowers. Bees actually increase their frequency and accuracy of collection over time. So the more times they visit a flower, the quicker they are to learn how to actually access the reward. So it's more efficient for them to keep visiting the same flower sort of again and again. So it's a mix of that increase in accuracy and speed of extraction combined with something the plant is offering new that day compared to other days.
Here's a question for, I think, for Shannon. Did you find many mason bees?
No, not so much. No, I'm not sure why that would be. But no, not so much.
Here's one from John. Any info as to why some plants are more attractive to pollinators?
Actually, I should say about the mason bees, we saw quite a few Megachilidae, which is the family of mason bees, but since we didn't identify right down a species, I can't quite answer on how many mason bees we saw, just to be a little more specific. Why some plants are more attractive to pollinators than others. I think it has to do with the floral reward, like how much foraging, how much time they're going to spend, and what the payout is going to be in terms of food. Victoria, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, same thing, whether there's some kind of reward. Some plants actually have like bioactive compounds that can help them fight off disease. So let you go to plants to medicate themselves. Sometimes it's the shape of the flower, as sort of Shannon was mentioning, that they can recognize it better from a distance, or they can get into the flower rewards better. So lots of different things can attract them.
So do we have any other questions that people would like to ask? Otherwise, what we'll do is we'll turn things over to Victoria again. Oh, wait, there's a question just came up from Drew. What would you suggest to a novice gardener trying to make a new pollinator garden?
Well, the Pollination Guelph website has some excellent resources. So if you go into your garden, what I like to do is I'll take a picture in the morning, I'll take a picture midway through the day, and then in the afternoon, so I can get a really good sense of how the light changes throughout the day. That'll help me to determine what my light conditions are, which could be variable throughout the yard. It's good to assess what kind of soil you have as well, and the moisture that you have in your soil and sort of in the area. Like, do you have an area in your yard that tends to get more water, more moisture than others? And then I recommend going on the Pollination Guelph website, checking out our planting resources and plant lists to find something that's suitable for your conditions. Thanks, Drew.
And actually, I would take advantage of that lovely list of 8 plants that you made to suggest, that you showed us within your presentation. Shayna asked, and I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong, Shayna. Are there ways you would suggest people monitor their own pollinator gardens to see how well they are doing?
Oh, that's a great question, Shayna. So I actually converted my boulevard, which was turf, to a pollinator garden. It's about, I think it's 9 meters square in area, so it's not very large. And this year I decided to do my own pollinator survey. So I got a lawn chair and I like sat in each corner of the garden for about 10 minutes and just observed everything that visited while I was sitting there. And for things, like I said, that I couldn't identify right then, I just used iNaturalist. So I had my phone with me and I took pictures and identified it. And if I found it was taking too much time to identify right then, I would save the pictures, I would record the picture number on my clipboard, and then I would identify them at a later date using iNaturalist.
Mhm.
So I think that's something, you know, if you choose to do it once or twice a year, do it around the same time every year, especially if your pollinator garden if you're adding more and more to it every year. I think that's a great way to monitor who's coming and who's visiting your habitat.
Okay, and, oh, yeah, good. Okay, so I think that's it for questions. And Victoria, would you like to, oh, can we get a copy of the presentation, especially the flowers? Yes, this will be up on our YouTube channel, and I think there on the shared document, you can see, don't forget to check out other talks on our YouTube channel, and there's the information for that. So that information I think will also be on our website, but I'll let Victoria take over.
Yeah, so definitely check out our YouTube channel for upcoming talks, because there's a lot of great details, not just in Shannon's talk, but in all the other previous talks. So check out our YouTube channel. It has a benefit of being able to pause it, replay things. It's sometimes even better than having it live. They can take that extra time to process statements. I will make a comment though, don't focus too much on just the top 5 plants, because all the plants do provide some kind of resource. And we don't want to specialize on just, the top 5 pollinators. We want to make sure all the pollinators have food. So figure out what works for your garden. Like different plants work better in different spaces. So as Shannon was saying, think about your, soil, light, everything like that. So again, yeah, thank you, Shannon. Awesome talk. It's so neat to see the results and kind of visual format of what you actually were finding at hospice and at the Gosling Wildlife Gardens. Because so often we plant things and assume it's good for pollinators. We don't always know. And so this is actually giving us proof. And now we look forward into time. We're getting more, pollinators over time. And that's a nice example that people can see to how iNaturalist works. People may have heard of iNaturalist, but don't actually know what actually is this. And this is something for the general public to use. And she say, obviously, yes, anyone with a camera and an internet connection can use iNaturalist. So thank you so much, Shannon, for all your sharing your expertise, and especially your time to actually do the surveys, because Shannon did this on a volunteer basis, but she's doing this work based on her doctoral work and experience and everything. So kudos to you, Shannon. And for everyone else, thank you for attending, and have a great rest of the week. And think of the pollinators this fall and next spring, and dream of spring with your new garden plans. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Victoria. Thanks, everyone.